We're just gonna hold a book up.
Yeah, basically.
That's how the video begins.
That's how it always begins. What are you talking about?
Just like this.
Get out of the shot, Keenan.
Like
You're ruining everything.
This isn't your response. Okay.
After 20 seconds.
20 seconds of
Finding out.
Yeah.
Internet quiz.
Exactly. What chapter was it? 13?
14.
14. I'm on the ball. Alright. So we're going to be talking about internet and queerness. One of the first things we wanted to talk about were kind of the intersection of like capitalism and identity and censorship. And it's something that's interesting to me a lot just because keeping a free internet's a really big deal to me. Internet's been vital in me being able to know who I am, being able to have a name for what I am, which is really important to me. I know it's not important to other people, but whatever. And so I like to keep up on censorship laws, and what you're finding more and more is that there's a push by corporate entities to control the internet and to kind of block access in certain ways. So, for one example is, and I can't even remember the name of it. Basically the concept is that internet providers would be able to make certain websites load faster than other websites by allowing more broadband, do you remember what it's called? By allowing more access for those companies that paid them to make it faster for them to load those sites that people would naturally want to go
Net
to.
neutrality.
Net neutrality, yes, there we go, thank you.
And what she's speaking of is a lack of net neutrality.
Yeah.
When there's not net neutrality.
Exactly. And the biggest problem that you have with those is that you have to have a website or an entity that has inherent value for them to want to give you more broadband to get there faster. So, I mean, that's a huge part of what I would think the intersection of capitalism and identity is, where your identity starts to be kind of monetarily valued.
And for me, a problem with that would be, there would be a rich queer community who would be able to pay the money to get faster uploads
For certain things,
though. But the problem is then only the intersection of wealth gets to define
Exactly.
LGBTQ identity. So you're being, but that happens anyway when, like the book said, with examples of advertisements about Logo TV
Yeah.
and all of that, and so now Logo seems to be part of queer identity, because I know that my mom called me one time, she was like, I'm watching tons of Logo TV in support of you, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what Logo TV is, but that's cool.
Armchair activism. I'll watch your TV. Yeah, and it's a frustrating thing to run up against, I think, that's just become more and more, I don't know why I'm scratching my face, more and more relevant as time goes on, because the expansive influence that the internet's having more and more. I'm using that phrase way too much.
And also to get out of the global north, because these are
that is true.
Exclusively global north
true.
Problems when it comes to censorship in places like Iran or Saudi Arabia. You can't effectively network, and you're watched when you do network. But I mean, the book makes it seem like queers can't get beyond those censorship laws,
and
the thing
fair,
is,
that's
it really
not just a third world problem too. I mean, like in the book,
isn't.
it talks about, you know, the student from Kentucky, of course, who was originally expelled, and all his grades were converted to Fs because of identifying as gay online.
But I do know somebody who is a cross-dresser from Saudi Arabia who gets on any website that he wants. He just gets a proxy, and then boom, he has destroyed all of Saudi Arabia's censorship laws, just like that.
But I mean, and along with that, there's a certain technical knowledge that goes along with that. And if you don't have that technical knowledge, then there's no way for you to connect.
That is true.
And I mean, and the ability to get that technical knowledge in of itself is a very gendered and wealth-defined barrier.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to be able to have a way to educate yourself, and in communities where that education isn't readily available, wealth plays a big part of that, and gender as well.
for me, at the very least, I like to look at it as like some kind of Saudi queer community and some
it
kind of
exists.
underground is being formed, which brings us to
It's a
our
queer
next
community.
point.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about building queer communities online, and kind of, for me at least, the biggest question is kind of, I hate to use the term validity, because it's not a very nice term when you question a group or a community's validity, and I have mixed feelings personally, because I grew up in the South, and, like, I'm sure everyone's tired of hearing about, but I grew up in the South, and you can't even really be completely out online, you know? I mean, like the example from the book shows of the boy who was, you know, let go and his grades converted to Fs. It's, even online, you're completely, like, watched and monitored, and people are judging, and they see you, so...
Well, I mean...
there's a place for it.
There is a place for it, but my experiences don't actually match your experiences, because there are message forms that aren't MySpace, that aren't Facebook, that don't require your name.
Yeah.
They just require a username that you make.
And I mean, that's where I found a lot of my information. I found a lot of myself was through those forums.
And that's for me, that was very critical. I would have not been able to find the networks for trans anything. There were just tons of trans stuff on YouTube that was really inspirational to get me to be like, oh my god, transition can happen, and it could be really good for me. Seeing all those videos, and then there was also people who I can network with and like talk to and actually have empathy, which is something that I have found a little bit difficult to do in terms of the real world, finding a trans girl and being like, doesn't it suck tucking and, you know, all that shit, you know? And on the internet, I can do that, and that's really cool.
And I mean, I guess my mixed feelings come from, with forums that allow greater anonymity, there's less accountability, in my opinion, although I think there's less incentive to be a jerk to someone on those forums, because you're anonymous and you're all there for the same fucking reason, so... And
if you're not, you're a troll and you're gonna get banned.
But on the flip side, when you don't have a a solid identity or a well-rounded identity on those forums, I think sometimes even those communities can be a little bit impersonal. My biggest thing that I relate to, I mean, while I did do a lot of gender research online, I actually did more of my gender research through books, because my internet usage was largely monitored by my parents until I turned about 16. So what I did use the internet for, as far as identity-wise, was pagan resources, because I started being pagan right around the time that they stopped monitoring my internet as much. Because my dad had the whole system set up. And that, I mean, in a lot of ways that was really valuable. I mean, I had access to so much knowledge that I wouldn't have had otherwise, but I couldn't really connect with those people, because in a forum where there's so much anonymity, and rightfully so, because there's a lot of stigma attached with, you know, paganism even in workplaces and stuff like that. It can be impersonal, and it's almost like there's a disconnect. Does that make sense? Yeah, and to build on criticism, I would say any queer communities that are built on privilege, because we have the privilege of internet, which leads to access. And that's a huge thing, and I mean, there's a lot that needs to be said for third world countries or underprivileged countries where there's not a readily accessible internet. You know, you have to travel for hours to get to a town that may have an internet cafe, and even then you may not feel comfortable accessing the sites you really want to access, you know, etc. There's a lot that I think needs to be said for that, but I think I tend to speak from experience, and my experience with limited access has been one of stigmatization, as opposed to lack of critical physical access, which I think still needs to be examined as well, because there's if you don't even feel, what's the point of having that technology if you don't feel comfortable using it for what you need to use it for? Yes. In my opinion.
And the point of access was really interesting for me, because of how interested I am with studying Africa and all that identity. It really is a big point about access, because first of all, there are tons of isolated people who feel the feelings of homosexuality that they get naturally, of course, but they don't have a word for it because or they're so stigmatized because of it that they just can't deal with it. There's just total denial, and they don't have even one person in their high school or like one website that they read about somebody, about some homosexual relationship or some transition.
Yeah, there's no normalcy.
So there's no really anything that can awaken an identity, and there's no resource to further build on that identity.
It's
either.
a very solitary existence.
And then there's also no visibility outside. So then you have, because you have a lot of people who say homosexuality simply is not African. It's just not an African thing, but of course
it's a Western thing.
Africans are human beings.
So
they're going to feel these feelings. But the West can't say, oh ho ho.
Although,
there are tons of homosexuals.
I do think that, to go off of this, I do think that the identity that comes with being homosexual or any version of LGBT, I think there is a very westernized sense of your sexual orientation being identity. Do you know what I mean? I find that less, at least, as I talk to people who are international, that there's not an identity that comes with your sexual orientation.
Well, yeah, America does play on identity politics a lot.
Oh,
but
yeah.
At the very least, like, you can't really even say, like, that you're gay, because what is gay in Africa?
Yeah,
like
because it's not,
well,
yeah.
And of course, I can't speak about an entire continent, but but there's continental trends.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can talk about North America, there are continental trends there. I don't know. It's a very interesting thing, because I would hesitate to say that there exists this, like, universal identity, you know? But I do think that, like you said, that there are people that have those feelings, they don't know that they're completely normal.
Because I know, at least, like, for me, like, I've always been trans. I've always been asking myself, why can't I be a girl? But the thing is, like, I never even properly knew what the T in LGBT was until I read an article about Chaz Bono. So, I mean, I have all these feelings, but, like, I can't do anything with it. I can't come out to myself, which I feel like is an important part of the coming out process.
It's a huge part. If you don't even know what you are, how can you know what your next step is? Because if you don't have, I mean, because of the way we organize our information, I think, even on the internet, is unless you have a name for that identity, you can't go then research and access the knowledge for that identity. So if you don't know that you're trans, there's no way for you to get information on trans.
Because beforehand, I just thought that every person felt what I felt.
Yeah.
And that's, like, also another thing. If one of the assignment that you did for the short paper was, but I'm a cheerleader, one of the things that she says about, like, her lesbian attractions is, like, doesn't everybody feel this? Because she just assumes that, like, that's the human experience, because that's all we can really do until otherwise.
And I don't know that that was completely, I have mixed feelings on that as far as me personally, and I don't know that I assumed everyone felt like me. I felt, like, so wrong for feeling me. I think I had the opposite. I don't know why. Because it seemed very clear to me that everyone else was very comfortable with their identities. And growing up in the South, there's a very specific, I mean, I would say the gender identities are even more polarized in the South, because they look very specific. And if you look anything separate from those, you're wrong, essentially. You're like a traitor almost to these gender ideals.
I'm from Southern West Virginia.
That only kind of counts.
Well, but I guess what my point is that I knew that gender roles were rigged and everything. I just thought everybody secretly thought it was bullshit. And just kept it to themselves, and I was supposed to play that
I do think that part of that is Appalachia, because I've noticed with Appalachia, people, I'll say you guys, because I only partially identify with Appalachia. I have a split identity in a lot of senses. I feel like a lot of people from Appalachia are very private people, and they lead these very private lives, and your lives aren't out there. Like, you don't even give the vibe that what's out there is all of you. I mean, when I meet people from Appalachia, there's always this kind of knowledge that people have something else going on. In my opinion, that's the vibe I get. But in the South, people are really open, and so people tend to just tell you straight up what's going on in their minds and what's going on in their lives, and there comes a point when you're around people who are that open, and no one has yet to mention the fact that, I don't really feel like a girl. I don't really feel like a boy. Or, I'm clearly not this. I'm clearly not that. There comes a point where you go, holy shit, I am different. Like, this is wrong.
I guess I just was oblivious to that.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, every guy fucking hates being a guy.
Yeah. For it. I don't know, because I was very aware that, because I think part of it is I grew up with a sister, and my sister's incredibly femme, and she loves everything that comes with being femme and girly, and she thinks she challenges it by being athletic, but no, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was an only child, so I didn't
that's probably part of it, too.
I didn't have a sibling to bounce off of.
Yeah, and so, it was just growing up next to her, and she just fit right in. She felt comfortable with other girls, she felt comfortable with other guys, it wasn't a problem. Whereas for me, I felt so uncomfortable with everybody. Because it was so clear that I wasn't this and I wasn't that. So it's like, well, if you're not this or that, then what the fuck are you? So, and then anything I did to make myself more comfortable was wrong. Like chopping the hair short, dressing in baggier clothing so I don't have to see my boobs all the time, like that sort of stuff. It was considered wrong. So, the internet really did, when I finally got freer access to it, and freer access to books as well, that's really where I kind of started to recognize that there were others. So for me, access to that knowledge was less that, oh, other people don't feel like this, but rather, holy crap, there's a whole bunch of people that actually do feel like this. So, that's kind of my difference of experiences. I know we're running low on time, but I really do want to talk about internet activism. So do you want to start with that?
You go with it.
I just talked a shit ton, so...
in terms of internet activism, I think that access is a good segue to internet activism because I feel like part of an internet activist's job is to further expand access so you can touch base and bring people into the fold of us, because we've been touched by the internet, we've been touched by that community, and I feel like a big part of internet activism for me is expanding the internet so that people can have my similar privilege of having this queer community until that privilege just becomes a right.
Yeah.
Maybe.
No, I can understand that. I think it does follow that if you've really found value in having the internet, that you want to spread access to it, because you recognize that there has to be someone out there that doesn't have access to it that probably needs it. So I do think that that's part of it. We talked a lot about internet activism in Hara's capstone class, so this is something that's still really interesting, because I still haven't found a good happy medium with activism, because I think that there is a level of internet activism that is inherently lazy, which in turn does allow greater access to it. But if there's not an action, a concrete action that follows, then I sometimes question the purpose of internet activism outside of building community.
That is the folly of armchair activism.
Yeah, armchair activism. Yeah.
When you just share a photo on Facebook and then you don't follow up wanting to exert that worldview.
Yeah. Or you'll spread all this information about, people who are very anti-LGBT rights, LGBT marriage, and then you don't go vote. That sort of stuff.
But for me, I would rather have armchair activists than people completely in the dark.
Yeah, because I do think it does fundamentally change culture.
Inherently, when you stomp out darkness and you bring in the light, and you have people who are naturally going to feel that they need to do some kind of activism, and you turn on a spark. Some people might just become armchair activists, but some of those people are going, if you're an armchair activist, you might touch somebody who's like, whoa, that's a problem. I'm going to go out there and march for that.
Yeah. It can, on occasion, really strike someone. And it really does lead to greater change.
Which is why I think it's so important to be out, because you can't ignore outness.
That's a whole bag of worms.
That's a whole bag of worms, but...
I do agree to an extent, because I do think that there There are very good reasons not to be out, but I think if you're not out, it's very hard to do activism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you can sit there and call yourself an ally all you want, but if you're really LGBT, I feel like it's gonna show, you know.
In some way.
In some way. I mean,
at the very least, you're gonna tell people eventually, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, and you're gonna change somebody's view.
That's true.
That.
Although I don't think I'd change my parents.
But this video is
this is way too long. Oh god.
This is ridiculous.
But I do think we covered everything, and I think it's clear that we thought.
Critically.
Have fun grading this one, Hara.
It's gonna be great.
Close.